Cologne, Germany. March 6, 1945. Rubble chokes the streets. Through shattered buildings, smoke drifts lazily upward. Two M4 Sherman tanks push forward, infantry behind them, moving toward the cathedral. Those Gothic spires, still standing after 262 bombing raids, tower over what's left of the city. A corpse of concrete and steel. The lead Sherman's commander, Robert Kellner, a technician 5th grade, scans the intersection. Behind him, the 2nd Sherman advances cautiously. They've been doing this for days now. Clear a street. Support the infantry. Move to the next block. It's become almost routine. Then the Panther opens fire. 275mm shells slam through the lead Sherman's gun shield in rapid succession. The armor, 81mm thick, built to stop early war German tanks, might as well be cardboard. Inside, the devastation is instant. The driver dies immediately. The gunner takes a fatal hit. Kellner staggers from the smoking turret, his leg blown off below the knee. The 2nd Sherman's driver throws the transmission into reverse. Too late. A 3rd German shell rips through the tracks. The crew abandons ship. The Panther, a Panzer V Model A from Panzer Brigade 106 Feldherrnhall, sits in ambush near the train station. Its commander, 2nd Lieutenant Wilhelm Bartelborth, chose his position carefully. The demolished Hohenzollern Bridge behind him cuts off retreat. Only forward movement. Only fighting. His tank, with its sloped frontal armor and high-velocity gun, has been terrorizing Sherman crews since Normandy. But 3 blocks away, rolling down a parallel street, comes something Bartelborth has never encountered. Something his intelligence officers never warned him about. Something that will, in the next 90 seconds, shatter every assumption German tank commanders held about American armor. The M26 Pershing. And with it, the end of German tank supremacy on the Western Front. Understanding the contempt. To grasp why the Pershing mattered, why its appearance in early 1945 represented such a psychological shock to German tank crews, you need to understand the contempt they developed. The absolute certainty of superiority that came from 2 years of combat against American tanks. This wasn't just confidence. It was mathematical certainty. The Sherman, 46,000 built, the backbone of American armored forces. Against early war German tanks, the Panzer III and Panzer IV, it had been adequate, even effective. The 75mm gun could penetrate their armor at combat ranges. The sloped frontal armor could sometimes deflect incoming rounds. But by late 1943, when the Panther and Tiger entered mass production, the Sherman became, in German eyes, little more than target practice. The numbers were brutal. A Sherman's frontal armor, 81mm at best, sloped but vulnerable. The 75mm M3 gun, low velocity, designed for reliability rather than penetration. Against a Panther's frontal armor, 100mm thick and heavily sloped, it was useless at any range beyond point blank. Against a Tiger's frontal plate, 102mm of flat but incredibly hard steel, equally hopeless. German tank commanders knew this. They'd proven it at Normandy, at Mortain, in the Hurtgen Forest. Panthers could engage Shermans at 2,000 yards and destroy them with near impunity. Tigers, with their 88mm guns, could kill Shermans from even farther out. The Americans compensated with numbers. For every Panther, there might be 5 Shermans. For every Tiger, 10. The strategy was crude but effective. Overwhelm through mass, accept losses, keep advancing. But the psychological cost was immense. American tank crews knew that every time they rolled out, they were outmatched. That if they encountered a Panther or Tiger, survival meant flanking, ambush, artillery support, or airstrikes. Never a fair fight. The Sherman crews developed gallows humor. They called their tanks Ronsons after the lighter company's advertising slogan, "Lights first time, every time," or Tommy Cookers, the British equivalent. Because when an 88 hit a Sherman, it didn't just penetrate, it ignited. The ammunition stowed throughout the hull caught fire. Crews had seconds to escape before the entire vehicle became an inferno. German tank commanders, particularly those in SS Panzer divisions, viewed American armor with something approaching disdain. They respected American artillery. They feared American air power. But the tanks? One Tiger commander, interviewed after the war, described engaging Shermans as hardly sport. The poor fools charged bravely and died bravely. But they died. Another commander from a Panther battalion noted in his diary, "They have so many tanks they can afford to waste them. We cannot afford to waste even one. But neither can they afford to face us fairly." This contempt wasn't irrational. It was based on cold statistics. A 1946 study by the U.S. Army Ballistic Research Laboratory examined armor-on-armor engagements in 1944. Despite eventual Sherman victories, often due to overwhelming numbers and combined arms tactics, the individual tank versus tank encounters told a darker story. A Tiger's kill-to-loss ratio, over 5 to 1. Some Tiger battalions achieved ratios exceeding 12 to 1. Panthers, though less mechanically reliable and more vulnerable than Tigers, still dominated Shermans in direct combat. American tankers knew this. American commanders knew this. But production priorities, strategic calculations, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the German tank threat led to a decision that would haunt GIs across France and Germany. The Sherman was, in the words of the U.S. Army's own assessments, good enough. Not great. Not equal to German heavy armor, but adequate when used in mass with proper support. Except it wasn't. Not psychologically. Not for the crews who climbed into those tanks knowing that enemy armor could kill them from ranges where they couldn't effectively fight back. Not for the officers who watched their units take 30%, 40%, 50% losses in tank versus tank engagements. And certainly not for the men pulling their wounded buddies from burning hulls. The breaking point. By December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the situation became critical. German armor, including over 400 Panthers and dozens of Tigers and King Tigers, concentrated for a massive counteroffensive. American tank losses spiked. The inadequacy of the 75mm gun became undeniable. Even the upgraded Sherman with the 76mm gun couldn't reliably penetrate Panther frontal armor beyond point-blank range. A New York Times correspondent, Hanson Baldwin, published a scathing article on January 5, 1945. The headline asked, "Why, at this late stage in the war, are American tanks inferior to the enemy's?" The article detailed what tankers already knew, that German armor was superior in firepower and protection. That American tank crews were paying for that inferiority with their lives. The article created a scandal. Congress called for inquiries. The public demanded answers. But by then, a solution was already arriving in Europe. 20 tanks. Just 20 in the initial shipment. Designated T-26E3, soon to be standardized as the M26. Named Pershing, after the general who'd led American forces in World War I. They arrived at the Belgian port of Antwerp in January 1945, distributed to the 3rd and 9th Armored Divisions, sent forward for combat trials, for evaluation, to see if, finally, American tankers could meet German armor on equal terms. A different beast. The Pershing looked different. Lower profile than a Sherman. Wider. Heavier, 46 tons, 10 tons more than an M4. The turret, cast in one piece, was massive compared to the Shermans. And the gun, 90mm, the same caliber mounted on the M36 tank destroyer. But here, in a fully rotating turret, on a platform designed from the ground up to handle the weapon's weight and recoil. The specifications told one story. The combat performance would tell another. Frontal armor, 102mm thick on the glacis, sloped at 46 degrees. Effective thickness, nearly 160mm against flat trajectory fire. Better than a Panther's side armor. Nearly equal to a Tiger's frontal plate. The turret front, 4 inches of cast armor. Again sloped. Again vastly superior to anything Americans had fielded before. The 90mm M3 gun fired a 24-pound armor-piercing shell at 2,700 feet per second. At 1,000 yards, typical combat range in European cities and forests, it could penetrate over 170 millimeters of armor. Enough to punch through a Panther's frontal plate. Enough to threaten even a Tiger from the front. For the first time since American forces landed in France, they had a tank that could fight German heavy armor without needing flanking maneuvers. Without needing numerical superiority. Without needing to sacrifice 2 or 3 vehicles to kill one. But numbers on paper and combat performance are different things. German tank commanders, veterans of years of fighting, had learned to be skeptical. They'd seen American attempts at improvement before. The jumbo Sherman, with thicker armor, still vulnerable to high-velocity German guns. The 76mm Sherman, better, but still inadequate against frontal armor. Each improvement closed the gap slightly. None eliminated it. So when intelligence reports filtered back to German units in early 1945 mentioning a new American heavy tank, the reaction was dismissive. Another stopgap. Another inadequate response. The Americans, German commanders believed, simply didn't understand tank warfare the way the Wehrmacht did. They thought industrial mass production could compensate for technical inferiority. They were wrong, and they would keep paying for that error until the war ended. This was the mindset, the absolute certainty, the conviction that German armor, German engineering, German tactical skill would continue to dominate. That's what made March 6, 1945 in Cologne so significant. Because that certainty was about to collide with reality. Back to the street. The 2 Shermans, destroyed. Bartelborth's Panther, waiting. The crew, confident. They've done this dozens of times. Wait for American tanks. Ambush from a superior position. Fire. Kill. Withdraw or wait for the next target. The routine of predators who know they sit at the top of the food chain. 3 blocks away, Staff Sergeant Robert Early, commander of M26 Pershing serial number 30330E, receives the radio call. Panther in ambush near the cathedral. 2 Shermans down. Need immediate support. Early's crew, 5 men crammed into the new tank, had been in combat for only a few weeks. The Pershing was unfamiliar, heavier, slower to accelerate than a Sherman. The controls different. The visibility from inside somewhat limited by the thick armor. But they also knew what they had, a tank that, on paper at least, could trade shots with anything the Germans fielded. Early moves forward, parallel to the Panther's position, planning to approach from a side street, to catch Bartelborth's crew from a flank. It's standard tactics. Even with a better tank, why risk a frontal engagement when a flank shot guarantees a kill? Technical Sergeant James Bates, a Signal Corps photographer attached to the 3rd Armored Division, has taken position in a building overlooking the intersection. He watched the Shermans get destroyed. Watched the survivors bail out. Now, setting up his 16mm camera, he watches the Panther's turrets slowly traverse. Watching. Waiting. The German crew knows something's coming. They don't know what. Inside the Panther, Bartelborth studies the side street through his periscope. He's seen American tanks approach this way before. Always Shermans. High silhouette. Distinctive turret shape. Easy to identify. Easy to kill. His gunner, already on target, waits for the command to fire. 1 shot. Maybe 2. Another kill to add to the tally. The routine so familiar it's almost boring. Then Early's Pershing noses around the corner. For a critical, fatal second, Bartelborth hesitates. The silhouette is wrong. Lower than a Sherman. The turret shape unfamiliar. German? Impossible. But the profile looks similar to German designs. Low. Wide. Sloped armor. For a moment, Bartelborth would later tell his family he thought it might be a Panther from another unit. He tells his gunner to hold fire, to confirm the target. That hesitation costs him everything. 90 seconds. Inside the Pershing, Corporal Clarence Moyer, the gunner, sees the Panther immediately. Sees the gun barrel aimed toward where they'll emerge. But Early has already committed to the maneuver. The Pershing continues rolling forward. Moyer's hand on the firing control, traversing the turret, trying to get the sights onto the target. Normally, A tank stops before firing, stabilizes, allows the gunner a steady platform. But there's no time. The Panther is right there, gun aimed, waiting. Smoyer fires on the move. The 90mm gun roars. The entire Pershing rocks back on its suspension. Inside, the noise is overwhelming, even with headphones. The recoil throws the gun sight off target. Smoyer can't see if he hit, but he fired first. That's something. In most tank versus tank engagements, the tank that fires first, that scores the first hit, wins. The armor-piercing shell, 24 pounds of hardened steel traveling at 2,700 feet per second, strikes the Panther just below the gun shield. The impact is catastrophic. The shell punches through the frontal armor. 80mm of steel that had stopped dozens of Sherman rounds. Punches through and detonates inside the fighting compartment. Shrapnel ricochets through the interior. The loader dies instantly. The gunner is wounded. The driver, sealed in his compartment, feels the shockwave but isn't directly hit. But Smoyer doesn't know if the Panther is dead. Can't see through the smoke and dust. Early screams at the driver to keep moving. Don't stop. Don't become a stationary target. German tank commanders, particularly the veterans who dominated European battlefields since 1940, had to recalibrate. The Americans weren't a joke anymore. Weren't just throwing masses of inferior tanks at superior German engineering. They'd learned. They'd adapted. And they'd produced a weapon that worked. Design philosophy. The Pershing's design reflected lessons learned from years of watching American tanks die. The thick sloped frontal armor mirrored the Panther's design philosophy. The 90mm gun matched roughly the penetration capability of German 88mm weapons. The low profile reduced visibility and made the tank harder to hit. The wide tracks, similar to German designs, reduced ground pressure and improved mobility in mud and snow. But the Pershing also retained American design priorities: reliability, ease of maintenance, crew comfort. The interior, while cramped by stateside factory standards, was spacious compared to German tanks. The crew had more room to work, more room to escape if hit. The electrical system was simpler, less prone to breakdown. The engine, while somewhat underpowered for the tank's weight, was the same Ford GAA that powered the Sherman. Familiar to mechanics, easy to service, parts readily available. German tanks, by contrast, were engineering marvels that became maintenance nightmares. The Panther, beautiful on paper, suffered chronic transmission failures. The Tiger, nearly invincible in combat, broke down constantly, required extensive maintenance after every road march, consumed fuel at rates that Germany's strained logistics system couldn't support. The King Tiger, the ultimate expression of German heavy tank philosophy, was so heavy and complex that entire battalions would have more tanks in repair than in combat. This was the fundamental difference. The Pershing was designed to be good enough to fight German armor, but also reliable enough to keep fighting, simple enough to keep running, available in large enough numbers to matter. The Germans had designed the perfect tank. The Americans had designed a tank they could actually build and field in useful numbers. But even that's not quite right, because the Pershing, for all its improvements, still had flaws. The Ford GAA engine, designed to power a 33-ton Sherman, struggled with a 46-ton Pershing. Acceleration was sluggish. Maximum speed on roads, 30 miles per hour, was adequate but not impressive. Cross-country speed was even slower. The transmission, also borrowed from the Sherman, proved somewhat unreliable under the additional stress. The gun, while powerful, had limitations. The 90mm M3 was essentially a scaled-up anti-aircraft gun adapted for anti-tank use. It worked. It could penetrate heavy German armor, but it lacked the muzzle velocity of the longer German 88mm KWK 43 mounted on the King Tiger. At extreme ranges, beyond 1,500 yards, the Pershing's gun started to lose effectiveness. Not a problem in European cities and forests where engagement ranges rarely exceeded 1,000 yards, but still a limitation. And the Pershing arrived late. so late that its impact on World War II was negligible. The war was essentially decided by the time the first Pershings rolled off the production line in November 1944. D-Day had been 10 months earlier. The Battle of the Bulge, the last major German offensive, would be contained with Shermans, not Pershings. The Rhine crossings, the final drive into Germany. These were accomplished primarily with the tanks America already had. Masses of Shermans, swarms of them, accepting losses, but advancing through sheer weight of numbers. Why it matters. So why does the Pershing matter? Why does the Cologne duel, 90 seconds of combat captured on film, remain significant? Because it represented a shift, not in the outcome of the war, that was already determined, but in American armor philosophy, in the willingness to acknowledge that sometimes you need more than just more. You need better. The debates leading up to the Pershing's deployment were fierce. General Leslie McNair, Chief of Army Ground Forces, believed that tank destroyers were the answer to enemy armor. Lightly armored, mobile vehicles with powerful guns, cheaper than tanks, easier to produce, could be deployed in larger numbers. Why build expensive heavy tanks when you could build tank destroyers and use your medium tanks for infantry support? The problem was that doctrine met reality on the beaches of Normandy and in the hedgerows beyond. Tank destroyers worked when they could set up ambushes, when they could engage from concealed positions. But in mobile warfare, in the confused close-range fighting of French villages and German cities, they were vulnerable. Their light armor couldn't take hits. Their open-top turrets exposed crews to artillery and mortars. And tactically, commanders kept using them as tanks, not as specialized anti-tank weapons, because commanders needed armor, needed vehicles that could take hits and keep fighting. General Jacob Devers, head of the armored force, pushed for heavy tanks, for vehicles that could match German Panthers and Tigers, for tanks that American crews could take into battle without feeling like they were driving coffins. The T-26, the prototype that would become the Pershing, was his project. But production was delayed repeatedly by debates over specifications, by competing priorities, by the belief, somehow persisting despite all evidence, that the Sherman was adequate. Only the Battle of the Bulge broke through this institutional inertia, when the German counteroffensive demonstrated yet again that American armor was outmatched, when tank losses spiked and calls for better tanks became impossible to ignore. Only then were the Pershings rushed to Europe. Only then was production accelerated, by which time the war had 3 months left. The real legacy. The real legacy of the Pershing wasn't in World War II. It was in Korea. And in the development philosophy it established for American tanks going forward. In Korea, from 1950 to 1953, M26 Pershings faced Soviet T-34-85S, fielded by North Korean and Chinese forces. The T-34-85, a formidable medium tank, had an 85 mm gun that could threaten Shermans. Against Pershings, it was outmatched. The 90 mm gun could penetrate T-34 armor at any combat range. The Pershing's armor could generally stop 85 mm fire at anything beyond point-blank range. A 1954 survey showed that Pershings accounted for 32% of American tank kills in Korea despite making up a smaller percentage of deployed armor. The kill-to-loss ratio heavily favored the Pershing. It proved that the design worked, that American tankers, given equipment equal or superior to their opponents, could dominate. But the Pershing also revealed its flaws in Korea. The underpowered engine struggled in Korea's mountainous terrain. Transmission failures that plagued European service became worse. Maintenance requirements were high. By 1951, the Pershing was being replaced by the M46 Patton, essentially an M26 with a better engine and improved transmission. The same design, refined, made reliable, made effective. And the Patton led to the M47, and the M47 to the M48, and the M48 eventually to the M60. A direct lineage, each generation learning from the last. each improving on the formula. Better guns, better armor, better engines, better fire control.